It was the dead of winter, and I was alone in the cabin. I'd rented the place for the month, a way to get some peace and quiet. City life had started wearing me down, and I just needed to unplug, you know? No phone, no internet, just me, the snow, and my thoughts. The cabin was far off the beaten path, miles from the nearest town, tucked away in the woods. Perfect for someone looking to escape. The first week had been blissful. The silence was something I hadn't experienced in years, almost unnatural in its stillness. The wind whispered through the trees, the snow fell in a soft hush, and at night, the only light came from the stars and the faint glow of the moon. But that night was different. It started with the feeling that something wasn't right. You know how sometimes you just feel it, like a presence, even though you're alone? That night, as the wind howled outside, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was just being paranoid. The isolation, the dark woods, it was bound to mess with anyone's head, right? I had settled into bed early, planning to read for a while before drifting off. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the room, and the wind had picked up outside, rattling the window panes. I remember the exact moment it happened. Just as I turned the page of my book, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the cabin, it might as well have been a gunshot. I froze, my heart immediately pounding. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night? I got up slowly, putting my book aside, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the wind outside, and I thought maybe I had imagined it. But then it came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not hurried, not desperate, just patient. I crept toward the door, my pulse racing. There was no peephole, just an old wooden door with a brass handle. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock, and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. The knock came again, 3 times, slow, steady. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open just enough to peer outside. And that's when I saw them. 2 kids stood on the porch, huddled together, their heads slightly bowed. A boy and a girl, both no older than 10. They were pale, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, the kind you'd see in some black and white photo from decades ago. The snow fell around them, but they didn't seem to notice the cold. The boy spoke first, his voice soft, almost too soft to hear. "Can we come in?" I stared at them, every instinct in my body screaming that something was wrong. What were 2 kids doing out here alone in the middle of the night? And why weren't they shivering? Their skin looked almost blue in the moonlight, but they didn't seem cold at all. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. The girl looked up then, and that's when I saw their eyes. They were black, completely black. No whites, no pupils, just an endless dark void staring straight into me. It was like looking into an abyss, a darkness so deep it made my stomach turn. The sight of it froze me in place, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The girl spoke this time, her voice low and monotonous, like she was reciting something. "We can't come in unless you invite us." My hand tightened on the door, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. Everything about them was wrong. Their faces, their eyes, their voices, they didn't belong here. They didn't belong anywhere. I can't let you in," I stammered, my throat dry. "You need to leave." The boy tilted his head slightly, like he didn't understand why I was refusing. "We just need to come inside for a little while. Please." His voice was so calm, so even, like it wasn't a request but a statement. Like they expected me to say yes, but I didn't. I couldn't. Every fibre of my being screamed at me to close the door, lock it, and never open it again. "I can't help you," I said, my voice shaking. Their expressions didn't change. They just stood there staring at me with those black, empty eyes. And then the boy spoke again, his voice a little sharper this time. "Let us in, we need to come in." I slammed the door shut. The door shut with a hollow thud, and I stood there, heart hammering in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hand was still on the knob, fingers trembling. For a moment I just stood there, listening, waiting for something, anything. But there was only silence. I stumbled back, my legs shaky as I moved away from the door. What the hell had I just seen? Those kids, their eyes, those eyes. There was no way to explain it. It didn't make sense. And yet the image of those black, soulless pits stared back at me, burning into my mind. I went to the window, pulling the curtain back just a sliver, and peered out. The porch was empty. The snow was falling in thick flakes, covering everything in a white blanket. but the kids were gone. My stomach twisted. Where could they have gone so quickly? There was nothing out there but miles of forest, the kind of cold that could kill a person in hours. They couldn't have just vanished. I stepped back from the window, my thoughts racing. The fire had burned low, and the shadows seemed to creep in from every corner of the cabin. It was too quiet now, too still. Even the wind outside had died down, leaving an oppressive silence in its place. I tried to distract myself, pacing the small room, telling myself that maybe I had imagined it, that the isolation was playing tricks on me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake that feeling, that wrongness that had come with them. Time dragged on. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, each second drawing out longer than the last. I didn't dare go near the door again, didn't dare look out the window. All I could do was wait, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the fire as the flames flickered lower and lower. And then, after what felt like hours, the knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I shot to my feet, my heart nearly stopping in my chest. It was them. I knew it was them, but how? How could they still be here, in this cold, in this darkness? I hadn't heard any footsteps. There hadn't been a single sound outside. I backed away from the door, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't open it again, I wouldn't, but the knocking didn't stop. It came again, 3 more knocks, and then a voice, soft and calm, from the other side. "Ooh, please, let us in. We're so cold." The boy's voice. It was so quiet, so gentle. But there was something wrong with it, something off. It wasn't the voice of a child asking for help. It was something else, something far more dangerous. The words were wrong, too flat, too practiced. As if he'd been saying them for a long, long time. I backed into the corner of the room, as far from the door as I could get, my eyes locked on the wooden frame. The knocking stopped. Silence again. But it wasn't a relief. It felt worse. The kind of silence that presses down on you like the whole world is holding its breath. And then the girl's voice. "We can't come in unless you invite us." I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but her voice was inside my head, echoing through my thoughts. She kept repeating the same words over and over again. "You have to invite us in. You have to let us in." I squeezed my eyes shut, rocking back and forth, whispering to myself that this wasn't happening, that they'd go away, that this was some nightmare I'd wake up from. But then there was a sound, a soft scratching sound coming from the window. I opened my eyes, my breath catching in my throat. The window, covered in frost, had gone dark, like something was blocking the light. I didn't want to look. I couldn't look, but my body moved on its own, dragging me toward the window, toward whatever was waiting outside. And there they were. The boy and the girl stood just outside, staring through the frost-covered glass. Their black eyes bored into me, unblinking, wide and endless. Their faces were pale, almost bluish in the dim light, but they didn't look like children anymore. There was something about their expressions, something old, something that had seen too much. "Let us in, Yuki," the boy said, his voice soft, almost pleading. "We need to come inside." My blood ran cold. How did they know my name? The girl pressed her face closer to the glass, her lips curling into a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those black, empty eyes stayed fixed on mine. "You can't leave us out here, not in the cold." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the bed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like my chest would burst. They were everywhere. No matter how far I backed away, they were there. At the door, at the window, whispering my name, calling to me, asking to be let in. "You have to invite us, Yuki. We can't come in unless you do." I screamed, grabbing the poker from the hearth, swinging it wildly at the door, the walls, anything to drown out their voices. But no matter what I did, they didn't leave. They didn't stop. The fire had gone out, leaving the room in near darkness, the shadows closing in, and I could feel them watching me, waiting for me to break. The darkness pressed in around me, thick and suffocating. The fire was out, and all I could hear was the wind howling outside and the relentless tapping at the window. My mind was unravelling, torn between terror and confusion. What were these things? Why did they want in so badly? The whispers started again, soft at first, but growing louder, crawling into my thoughts like cold fingers. "Let us in, Yuki. We can't come in unless you invite us." Their voices echoed from every corner of the cabin. It was like they were in the walls, in the very air. I couldn't block them out. No matter how hard I tried to cover my ears, their words slipped through, wrapping around my brain, squeezing tighter and tighter. I felt trapped, no way out, no escape. The cabin, which had once felt like a peaceful retreat, now felt like a prison, a tomb. I could hear the wind outside, but it was as if the world beyond the walls no longer existed. There was only them, waiting, watching. I forced myself to move, stumbling toward the kitchen. Maybe there was something there, anything I could use to protect myself, but as I turned the corner, I saw them again. Standing in the doorway, just inside the threshold of the window, the boy and the girl, their pale faces nearly glowing in the darkness, their eyes, those black, endless voids, locked onto mine. They weren't smiling anymore. "So cold, Yuki," the girl whispered, her voice flat and lifeless. "We need to come inside." I backed away, my stomach churning. How did they get inside? How had they passed the door? But they hadn't. They were still outside, weren't they? I didn't know what was real anymore. "You have to let us in," the boy said, stepping forward. His feet didn't seem to touch the floor. "You invited us, remember?" "No!" I shouted, clutching the counter for support. "I didn't invite you. I never." But then the memory hit me. The moment when I'd opened the door just a crack, peering out at them on the porch. Had that been enough? Was that all it took? The girl smiled again, but this time it wasn't a child's smile. It was something older, more sinister. "Once you see us, you're ours." My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear their voices. I had to get out of here. I had to run. But there was no way out. They were in the cabin now, and the door, when I turned to look at it, was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. The cabin seemed to shift around me, the walls closing in, the windows disappearing, leaving me trapped in a room that felt smaller by the second. They stepped closer, their black eyes fixed on me, and I could feel the cold radiating off them, seeping into my skin, into my bones. "Just say the words, Yuki," the boy said. His voice was almost soothing now, a lullaby in the darkness. "Just invite us in. It'll be over soon." My throat was dry, my mouth unable to form words, even if I had wanted to speak. But I didn't want to. I wouldn't let them in. I couldn't. If I gave in, if I said the words, something terrible would happen. Something I couldn't take back. But they were so close now. The girl's hand reached out, her fingers brushing against my arm. I recoiled, feeling the icy coldness of her touch. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. I stumbled back, grabbing the fire poker again, brandishing it in front of me like it could do any good. "Stay back," I screamed, my voice cracking. They didn't listen. They just kept coming. And then, just as the boy reached out for me, I heard it. Faint at first, but unmistakable. A voice coming from outside the cabin. "Yuki, Yuki, are you in there?" It was distant but familiar. Someone was calling my name. I wasn't alone. The kids froze. The boy's hand, inches from my face, stopped in midair, and he turned his head toward the door that I could no longer see. The girl's smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw something in their black eyes, something like fear. "Yuki!" The voice called again, louder this time. A beam of light flickered through the cracks in the wall. Someone was outside with a flashlight. The kids stepped back, their eyes narrowing, their faces twisting into expressions of anger, frustration. The boy opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, the shadows around them seemed to grow, wrapping around their bodies, pulling them back toward the window. "No!" the girl shrieked. Her voice suddenly filled with rage. "You can't escape. You let us in." But the light outside grew brighter, and the cabin door, which had vanished just moments ago, reappeared with a loud creak. I didn't wait. I ran toward it, flinging it open, crashing out into the snow, the cold air hitting me like a wall. I collapsed in a heap, gasping for breath, the voice outside still calling my name. I looked up, squinting into the light. It was the landlord, the old man who'd rented me the cabin. He was shining his flashlight towards me, his face twisted in confusion and concern. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice gruff. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I turned back to the cabin, expecting to see the kids at the window, their black eyes still staring at me. But there was nothing. The windows were dark, the porch empty. The cabin, as far as I could see, was just a cabin again. I don't know, I mumbled, my breath clouding in the freezing air. They were kids. They were inside. But he shook his head, his face pale. "You're lucky I came by," he muttered, his voice low. "Folks around here don't come out after dark, not after what happened." "What do you mean?" I asked, struggling to stand, my legs still shaking. The old man looked back at the cabin. his eyes filled with something close to fear. "A long time ago there were 2 kids. They froze to death out here, in a storm like this. Some say their spirits still wander these woods, looking for someone to let them in." He turned to me, his expression grim. "Once you let them in, they never leave." I felt the cold settle deeper into my bones. The kids, those black eyes, they were still out there, waiting, watching. And somehow I knew they'd be back,